Well, we've just had a rather amazing dialogue with over 20 people, senior investment decision makers, academics, lawyers, and others who are probably at the heart of the debate about how investors should deal with climate risk. And it was to consider how the idea of systemic risk can be best articulated and communicated so that it can have maximum impact in as short a time period as possible. And the thing that came across to me was the value of having people from multiple disciplines supporting and challenging each other in this project. It really delivered value in this seminar.
Well, systemic risk is really a risk that reaches beyond any one sector of the economy and globally and internationally to affect the value of everything. For example, if you have climate damage in one area affecting the food system, that can cascade through into, for example, countries like Egypt and Tunisia, major importers, but then also might lead on to political risk of others. So these are the risks that go way beyond the boundaries most people look at when they look at risk, but have happened in the past and will happen in the future with more frequency as you see climate change impact more.
Which means that you won't be able to insulate yourself from the impacts. If you're a country or if you're a company or a community, you won't be able to insulate yourself from the impacts of climate change.
I think we see it in the sense that it's an impact that has the potential to impact every aspect of our portfolio. So there isn't an asset class that it's not going to be affected, and it's going to affect our members, it's going to affect, and therefore our liabilities, it's going to affect our asset outperformance, it's going to affect every aspect of how we operate essentially our business as a pension fund. So it has the potential to have negative impacts across the piece.
I think a small number of investors, I always say when asked this question, around 5%, because that's my experience, do care deeply about this from an economic and financial point of view. They can see the risks building in their portfolios. I think the rest of investors, about 95%, don't care at all about it.
Investors are giving it more attention than what they were. There is definitely a direction of travel that suggests investors are beginning to appreciate this needs to be part of their agenda, part of their risk register, part of what they're thinking about.
And I think there has been quite an uptick in engagement over the last 12 to 18 months. I think post COP21 has a massive increase in the interest in this area, although I still think that it's not really thought of in a systemic way. It's sort of as a company issue or corporate. It's been very focused perhaps on the fossil fuel industry or very carbon intense industries rather than thinking about it more holistically.
But also there are many cultural and kind of cognitive bias reasons why they don't like to look at facts that might really have to cause quite radical changes in the way they do business as opposed to just tweaking existing portfolios.
This is one of the biggest problems with climate change. It's often very difficult to get people to understand the transformational impacts of unmanaged climate change over the next few decades and centuries, and also that it's decisions we make in the next few decades that will have consequences for not just decades but centuries to come, and that's a very difficult problem for people to grasp.
I think the first step is communication, education, which is a form of engagement. I also think that gathering examples of best practice, peer-to-peer training and communication of know-how, because certainly the messages that I'm getting is that there's a lack of experiential know-how around what to do with climate risk once it is actually understood.
The work Preventable Surprises is doing is important for stretching the expectations about what stewardship means. There are a number of investors who still don't appreciate, and I think it's because they feel quite distant. They hold a number of companies in their portfolios. They've delegated that ultimately investment responsibility to managers who are then looking at the companies. So it's really focusing the mind, I guess, and back to these are your responsibilities. to take ownership of these companies, and that you do actually have some influence about how those companies behave in order to create and preserve value aligned with your timeframes.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking very much as a sort of a pension fund and looking at kind of what motivates or the behaviours of pension funds, a lot of that comes around. They don't act. Many pension funds will not act without speaking to their actuary, and the actuarial profession sort of has the very skill base that's needed to try and take these long-term risks that we're perhaps a lot of not quite sure when it will hit or what the consequences will be, and trying to make sense of those and translate those for the purpose of their clients. So I think they have the exact skill base we need within this debate, and I think it also means that by influencing the actuaries and educating, bringing them into their knowledge and understanding of this area, they are very influential on the behaviours of their clients, which is the pension fund. So it's sort of influencing, having that domino effect sort of throughout the picture. I mean, we see that there is a link between one of the longevity debate and the fact that wasn't dealt with in a timely fashion, and that the risk of that has landed in this generation, where we're having constant pension reform to try and keep up with the fact that the longevity improvements were not factored in sufficiently early enough. And I think our mission is very much not to repeat the same mistakes again, and having that consequences of inaction brought in 50 years' time on that generation. I think that's what we're trying to avoid, and I think actuaries are very well placed to manage and help that issue.
I think the best way to make people realise how to deal with this is to give them something to do, but also make them realise they're part of a bigger system. We're not asking investors to solve the climate problem, but just do the bit they should do. So I think the best thing Preventable Surprises could do is not just give investors some new tools, but also expose them to how politicians, regulators, and other actors in the system are also acting. So they feel an important but not huge part of the whole solution, rather than at the moment when they think they're being asked to solve the whole issue on their own, which they're not, of course.
I think one has to keep pointing out to them how climate risk is being increasingly embedded in their portfolios as a contingent risk, which one day will come home to roost as an actual risk. And I think one must also point out to them what they should do about this, which is to use their votes to get emissions down from the companies they own. It's a very, very simple thing to do. Investors typically attach almost no value to votes, so it's very easy for them just to use those votes.
Great, thanks very much.